Good day, Mr. Mueller.
Good day.
May I?
Yes, of course. You are not disturbing my reading.
What are you currently reading?
Georg Philipp Haasdorffers Kunstverständig Diskurs, die Wissenschaft der frühen Neuzeit. Yes, from the series, Contributions to Art and Literature. This is exactly what preoccupies me.
Yes, you are, after all, at home between art and literature. Maybe just tell us a bit about yourself. Where you are from? Where do you live?
Let's start at the end. I am currently living in Heidelberg. I came here when I was 7 years old. This is also where I grew up. From my mother's side I am Jewish. This is something I have written about. This line comes from Czernowitz through my grandmother.
Talking about Czernowitz, that means you grew up with literature.
Mit der Großmutter, ja. Die Großmutter war eine sehr, also das ist ein interessant, also insoweit interessant, ist ein bestimmter Menschentyp, der
With my grandmother, yes. She was an interesting type of person. One who, just like the grandmother in Günter Graff's famous novel The Tin Drum, sits on the ground. She was a woman who really worked with the soil and later lived off the land, but at the same time she was a very worldly, wise and cultured woman. It sounds like an anecdote. But let me tell more, then it will make more sense to you. She told me as a small boy already, I was about 6 or 7, she said to me, Ray Nearly, you are the golden one, you must read, so you can become a famous man. And then she bought books in Potsdam, in the old DDR. One must just imagine, this happened in 1953. All kinds of books, Schopenhauer, The Pocket Oracle by Gracian, 2 volumes by Sholokov and Quiet Flows the Don, Apuleius, The Golden Ass, which was a kind of erotica, all such things. Whatever she could get she bought and gave to me. I could give a whole lecture about this, what it means for a child in a specific situation to know about its origins. But let's leave it. That one thing I can say, the foundations for what I do today, and what has accompanied me all my life, were already laid there.
Also, so das kann ich sagen, dass ich heute das mache, was ich mache und immer das gemacht habe, was mein ganzes Leben begleitet hat, war das schon grundgelegt.
There were always 2 things, the world that can be read and the world that manifests itself in images. These 2 realms have been decisive for everything. And later music also played a role. That was later in the 70s. Yes, that's how it was, yes.
Das war später, das war in den 70er Jahren, dann wurde das, ja, das kommt hin, ja. Ich war aus Freiburg zurückgekommen, war dann 72, 73
Yes,
wieder
I'm
hier.
getting the order right. I came back from Freiburg and in 72/73 back here. And then there was the friendship with Hans. We used to visit each other alternately once a week. Always in the same setting. We spoke about all kinds of things. Political philosophy, aesthetics, music. Always just one topic. At that time there was a renewed interest in Mahler in Germany. And from there it wasn't a big leap back to romantic piano music, like Schubert. And then we went a bit back in history. And then for me the more modern music, not all of it. The music festival in Donaueschingen did not convince me, but specific pieces of newer music. Like the incredible adaptation by Kurt Beckett's Endgame, which was premiered in Milan, which I watched on TV. And so it spanned a whole range of things. And reading. I have always read. As I have said anecdotally, coming from a completely broken family, reading represented the possibility to remain inwardly strong, not just metaphorically, but also something to help me survive within the structure of family. It played a huge role.
Und nicht nur im übertragenen Sinne, auch zu überleben in diesem Gefüge. Das hat schon eine große Rolle gespielt.
How is it when one reads so much and approaches the world reading and also in images? When does one start living these images and words? When does one begin to write them oneself?
Ich denke, es ist sicher milieuabhängig zum einen. Klar, ich bin ja also unabhängig von der Großmutter. Es war ja ein illiterates Haus, also Familie, in der ich da aufgewachsen bin. Da hat Bücher oder Musik hat da keine Rolle gespielt. Für mich hat sich das, wie soll ich sagen?
It probably depends on the social environment. Except for my grandmother, I grew up in an illiterate house and family. Music and books played no role. For me, the point at which a person thinks about what they read about and how that was made, and that it is not just simply there but that someone must have made that. And that one should be able to do this also. There was a specific point in my life. I am old enough to tell anecdotes. I was barely 7, that was when I was still in Karlstad, there I was. My mother was a professional photographer, and she had seasonal work in Krinn in Upper Bavaria. She took her little boy with her. During the day she worked and I was alone and walked around. It was in the 1950s and Krinn was a small health resort and nothing much was going on. And there I made myself an artist's easel from the planks from the packaging of photographic paper of the laboratory. Then I took this easel into the wheat fields. I had watercolors. And so the little boy stood in the grass meadows and did watercolors of the mountains. It was my first attempt to translate something I saw into something that I knew was a picture. No one had explained that to me. No one said, you should do so or so.
Dann stand der Bub in den Heuwiesen und hat mit den Wasserfarben Gemälde gemacht von den Bergen. Also das war der erste Versuch, bildlich etwas Gesehenes auf etwas zu übertragen, von dem ich wusste, es ist ein Bild. Das hat mir ja nie jemand erklärt. Das hat niemand gesagt, du musst das so oder so oder das ist. Nein. Also zum Beispiel. Und die schreiben als Form des verheimlichten Selbstausdrucks. Ein bisschen später, ich war so 11, 12 war ich. Da habe ich gedacht, ich muss jetzt einen Roman schreiben.
Also writing as a form of hidden self-expression came a bit later, when I was 11 or 12. And then I thought I must write a novel. I didn't know what that was exactly. I knew what it looked like. So I had thought something up. Sometimes it preoccupies me as a model till today. I had thought up the plot, even though I didn't know that word. The plot was that an old man was visited by a boy. The old man was visited by a boy. And the old man talks to the boy and explains something. And in that, the old man tells the boy about when he was the same age. And the boy writes it down as if they were his own memories. That was the story I had thought up. I wrote a few pages, just the way I thought one should write. And of course it did not work. But this was the first time that I had an idea that through writing you can create something that is readable and design something that extrinsically does not exist.
Das war zum ersten Mal, dass ich eine Vorstellung hatte von dem, dass man mit dem Geschriebenen etwas herstellen kann, das lesbar ist und etwas gestaltet, aufbaut, was außerhalb nicht vorhanden ist, sondern so im
What is interesting, what I thought about while listening are the different layers of memory, where it is not a real distinction between the owner or the other, but what is epigenetically within us.
Ja. Also diese Sache ist mir sehr also sehr klar. Ich habe auch noch, also interessant dann vom Erleben her, so ein Junge, ich bin teilweise, das hat auch mit meiner Potsdamer Kindheit zu tun.
This memory is very vivid. Interesting just from the perspective of experience. As a boy, I grew up partly in Potsdam in a barracks camp on what was called the Potsdam Ruinenberg. It is not far from Sanssouci. Ruinenberg. After the war there was a barrack camp there. I think one had taken it over from some previous time. A barracks camp. Some of the people like my parents and grandparents, who were driven out in 1946 from Czechoslovakia, were partly accommodated there. It is where I spent some of my childhood under impossible circumstances. There was electricity, but no running water and no toilets. Wood fires. Just leave it. Just leave it. In these barracks there was this old person, the old Runkel. He used to sit in the corner and chew tobacco and then he would spit it out. And I sat there a lot because I was always left alone. Always alone. Then one looked around. I always had a good imagination. Probably out of necessity. Because I never got anything visual or oral as nourishment. Those are the stories. At 12 I wrote my first testament.
Weil ich nichts bekam für die Augen und für die Ohren zum Essen. Und dann, ja, das sind die Geschichten. Und mit 12 habe ich mein erstes Testament geschrieben.
But that was very early.
Das war früh, aber das war, ja, da war mir schon dann deutlich geworden, dass ich in der Familie nichts mehr werde.
It was early because it was clear that in that family, I would become nothing. I had already, so to speak, survived some of the first episodes of suffering already. That's another story. In one of my poems in the collection Gespräch, there is a passage where there is a fictitious quotation, "It would have been better if one had stuffed you with coal and set you alight." But that is real, it is not a fictional picture. Or suffocate someone with a sack over the head, please leave me in peace.
Kein fiktives Bild, nein. Und es sind da, oder jemanden ersticken mit einem Sack, also bitte, lass mich in Ruhe. Übrigens, wenn wir dann von Gedichten sprechen, es gibt im Grunde in keinem Gedicht, auch wenn es aufs erste Lesen so scheint, die geografischen Angaben stimmen immer, sagen wir, lokale Ortsbezeichnungen stimmen immer, Landschafts- oder Baulichkeitsangaben stimmen immer, botanische Angaben oder Fauna, stimmt immer. Und auch unglaublichste Bilder, die zunächst so unglaublich erscheinen.
Speaking about my poems, there is no poem, even if it seems like it, the geographical details are always true, the locations are always true, landscape and buildings are always true, botanical details or fauna are always true. Also, the images that might seem unbelievable always correspond to or are taken from a lived or survived reality. It is not an invention. In the beginning of the 1970s, when it became clear what I wanted to do, and more precisely what I didn't want under any circumstances, there was a stage when, one could say, literature was very polemical and the poem makers were using very simplified formulae of depiction, to put it neutrally. There were certain reasons for this, but which don't really interest me. There was so much invention, that I was no longer interested. I experienced it as untrue and I did not want anything to do with it. Because the attitude of the poem did not correspond with the real life of the young people of my generation. It wasn't true and there was a lot of lying in it. And because until my 30th and 32nd year I had been permanently living within a construct of lies, of untruth, of not being able to trust, it was important that in the form I had chosen to do what I wanted to do, that things should be as true as possible.
Bis sich dann allmählich alles klärte, im Grunde permanent in einem Gefüge der Lüge, der Unwahrheit, des Nicht-Vertrauen-Könnens gelebt habe, war mir zumindest in der Form, in der ich das mache, was ich machen möchte, wichtig, dass da die Dinge nach den Möglichkeiten, die man hat, wahr sind.
One can say that there is a search for truthfulness in your writing?
Es war eine Suche nach der Wahrhaftigkeit im Bereich der Kunst. Das hat sich dann rasch erweitert. Es betraf die literarische Kunst, es betraf die bildende Kunst, dass es darum ging.
It was a search for truthfulness in the sphere of the arts. It quickly expanded. It touched the literary arts and the visual arts. It was about how far the appearance of that which we hear, read and see, is from what it set out to be or from what it claimed to be. If that did not correspond, I left it alone. And I tried to walk a path which allowed me to notice the dialogue between the different arts as an aesthetic space. Also as the conversations that works of art in an exhibition or museum have with each other. I have always built up exhibitions.
Auch die Unterhaltung, die Kunstwerke in einem Museum oder einer Ausstellung oder so miteinander führen. Ich habe auch Ausstellungen später dann immer so gebaut, dass
You were also a curator.
Ja, das war ja mein Leben geworden. Ich wollte unabhängig sein auf der primären Ebene, finanziell unabhängig und immer bestimmen, was ich mache und nicht abhängig sein, dass mir jemand sagt, du musst das machen oder machen Sie das so oder machen Sie das so. Das war mit mir nicht zu machen, schon seit dem
Yes, that became my life. I wanted to be independent on a basic level, financially and always determine what I do. Not to be dependent so that someone tells me how things should be done. That has never worked even when I was a child. Also not at school. I wanted to set up my own exhibitions and it was probably gifted in this area. I started very early with it. I also wrote about art very early on and was noticed because I wrote in a way that others didn't, and this opened a path into this field. I often curated exhibitions in a way that, at least for me, they had a kind of chamber music orchestration. So that during more intimate guided tours and in small gallery conversations, I could tell the viewers why this hangs there, or that stands there. What is that? How does that work? Why did I choose this one and not another? This played a big role. And in this way, I was very successful and I managed to stay independent as a writer. Publishers asked if I wanted to publish with them and I did not do it because at a certain point it was clear to me that I could not determine the appearance of the text on the page. It was clear to me that a poem is not just a written sounded creation but that it is important how it is printed, how it looks and how much space it has around it. What comes next? All kinds of things like that.
Mir war klar, ein Gedicht ist nicht nur ein geschriebenes, lautliches Gebilde, sondern es ist entscheidend, in welcher Art es gedruckt ist, es ist entscheidend, wie es steht, wie viel Platz drumherum ist, was als nächstes kommt, lauter so Sachen.
Maybe we show what your book looks like. You show us how the visuals work in the poems.
I had to fight with Ingela. Fought with Ingela.
Ursula Ingela is one of the publishers who are very generous with his authors, and still one can imagine what constraints there are behind it all.
Und ich habe mich gesträubt
Yes.
gegen das Format.
I resisted
Und
so
dann
hard against
war
the
alles
format,
gut.
and then
Es war
everything was
alles
fine.
gut. Ja, ja,
Then
war alles
everything
gut.
was fine.
Aber ich meine, das ist natürlich
Everything
auch,
was
weil
fine.
natürlich in unserer
But our
Reihe
series
ja
is
auch sehr
also
viel,
about
es
where does
geht
one belong,
wohin gehört
what is
man,
important,
was ist wichtig,
what
was
is
ist eigentlich
truthful,
wahrhaftig.
and the
diese
idea that
Idee,
one is at
dass
home in
man sowohl
both,
in der
in
Lyrik
poetry
als
and in the
auch im
visual,
Visuellen zu
that this
Hause
can
ist.
also be a
Also
lonely
was
place.
Da habe ich gerade von wegen visuell und was ist wichtig und was ist
Yes,
wahr.
talking
Und das
about
kann
the
man mit der
visual and
Wahrheit
what is
machen.
important and what is truthful.
Ja,
What could one do with the truth? I want to stick a note onto this
Ich hätte gerne
page
einen Cut
quickly.
gemacht jetzt.